Welcome to the latest episode of 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's where we're taking episode ideas. We're actually taking the one today from there. Make sure you're subscribed. Again, put the link right here in the description. You got 10 channels on there. You get everything for $2.99 per month. Communicate with us, communicate with Heat fans, and get away from Elon Musk's Twitter, or X, or whatever it is he's calling these days. Also, check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Our friend Nelson and his family, his team at Mobile C-Arm and Staffing Services, 561-891-9620. Huge Miami Heat fans. But here's the biggest thing. If you work in a medical office or a hospital and you need x-ray equipment, they will bring it to you. They'll also bring the staffing. They take care of everything. It's all on their website, which again is c-armandstaffing.com. Again, c-armandstaffing.com. 561-891-9620. Make sure you tell them 5 Reasons sent you. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all banned. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat, we trust, it's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at 5 Reasons Sports. We got Greg Sylvander. You can follow me at Greg Sylvander. We are trying to do episodes every day of the offseason, take you right up into training camp in the Bahamas, which will be in late September. We'll give you more details as the Heat give that out. But yes, this is a Herculean task, one of the hardest things I've ever had to engage in, to come up with topics through the entire offseason when the team got eliminated in the first round. I mean, we had last year was easy. Like we rolled right into June, right into July, still the aftermath in August. This year, this thing was over at the end of April. And so it was May, it was June. None of you wanted to watch the Celtics in the finals, so we weren't going to talk about any of that. Free agency, nothing happened really of any significance, but we did have Summer League. And of course, we've had some good developments for the Heat this offseason. In general, Greg, it's been, I think, a good offseason with the exception of the transaction stuff that Heat fans may be upset about because there wasn't enough of it. But like everything else has been good. I mean, Bam, tremendous, just a tremendous turn on the USA team. Everything about that was positive. Jaquez looked great in Summer League when he played. Kel'el was on the All-Summer League team. Larson, their second-round pick, hits the big shot in Summer League. Jovic didn't play as much as maybe we hoped or thought for Serbia, but he got a bronze medal. He did contribute in some ways there. Rozier appears to be on his course to be healthy for camp, as does Duncan Robinson. Like, all the other stuff has been pretty good, okay? But even if it's pretty good, and this is the topic today, we're going to do more of a philosophical episode here, which Greg and I do sometimes. Even if it's pretty good, it's probably not going to get the Heat a championship. And the only thing that has been sort of a negative this offseason is kind of the chatter about Jimmy Butler and the extension about whether he's going to be here long term. And of course, if the Heat are going to win a championship in the next couple of years, probably they're going to need Jimmy Butler to be on the team or be a big part of it. But I'm just going to ask this question because Pat Riley once framed it this way, but it doesn't seem like it's necessarily his guiding force at age 79. Is it still, in your view, a winning or misery proposition for the Miami Heat? Because Pat Riley has used that quote, obviously, in the past. It's attributed to him. I mean, if you go on Google and you Google winning or misery, Pat Riley's name and face come up. There's winning and there's misery. Do you think that is still – is that the dichotomy for the modern, current Miami Heat? Before we get into your view on it, do you think it's their view?
No, I don't. I don't think it's their view at all. I think that there's been an evolution. I mean, people have to remember, like, this is the guy that said at the championship parade on stage, and next year we're going to win it again. And then they went and won it again. Like, he's different. So he's wired different. And I don't want to discount that. But I do think as time has gone on, there's been humbling that's taken place. Like, he's been humbled many times in Miami. I mean, never mind New York or LA, just in Miami. I think if you kind of walk through the Alonzo Mourning scenario with his health and Chris Bosh with his health. You start to Dwayne Wade and his exit, and then like understanding kind of how that fractured the fan base and how that was felt, and how it sent ripple effects around the league about like how they treated him. And just, it may have been optics to some degree, but it is what was out there. I think a bigger picture perspective comes into play. And so like, it sounds cool. Like, trust me, the 1997 me, when Timmy scored 38 in game 6 and they eliminated the Knicks, I was running around screaming, there's winning and there's misery. And I thought we were going to win a championship one day. But in retrospect, just being in the conference finals as a Heat fan was such a big deal. Like, I'm taking us way back. So I just feel like even back in that time, there was perspective in that, man, we had never been there before. And I think that is, it rings true in a lot of ways. A lot of people think about like the 03-04 season as being one of their favorite Heat teams. Didn't win anything. I think there's a lot of examples like that. This Heat build has been really fun. I mean, you can't discount 2 finals trips. It's been fun. And they haven't won yet, but it hasn't been misery. I mean, miserable is the damn Charlotte Hornets. It's the Orlando Magic to some degree, maybe less so, but the Hornets is a good example. I can rattle off more. I just think that the Heat in general don't operate that way. And I think that it's actually showed in some of the patience that they've made with not being willing maybe to put everything on the table for certain guys like Bradley Beal, et cetera. They didn't overreact to certain scenarios. So to me, it doesn't signal a winning or misery mentality, even if that is the tagline that has sometimes followed the culture to some degree.
I wish I would have asked that question of Riley at his end of year presser. This is why I wish we could talk to him more than once, because you typically get like 2 questions a year if you're lucky. I got 2 in at that presser. Because I wonder if he still views it that way, or if it just sounded good at the time. You know, again, it's funny because I read The Winter Within. I think everybody who covered the Heat, I was not covering the Heat Riley's first year. I actually started covering them I guess halfway through his first year. I did. I was there for the Hardaway trade and all that. But when he arrived, the beat guys, like they all like crash read The Winter Within, which is actually about his Laker experience, but also I think he published it during his Knicks experience, from what I remember. And I had read it, but again, I wasn't covering the team at the time. But they all read it, and I remember he told one of the writers, it might have been Ira, if it wasn't, I apologize, but that he hated that book at that point. So I don't know if he still holds to all of. And I recommend, honestly, Heat fans read it. I do, because I think it gives you a perspective on how he built the culture of this organization, even if some of the stuff he may not necessarily feel the same way about at this time. And there's just great stuff in there, like the art of something like of temporary insanity and all that. He has all these phrases for all these different things. And as you look back, you'll think of things that happened during the Heat era that were somewhat reminiscent of what might have happened with him with the Lakers and with the Knicks. But what's interesting about him is that, and you mentioned patience, is that you would think as someone gets older, they become less patient, right? Because there is a timeline for all of us.
Oh yeah.
And he's 79 years old, and there's a timeline for how long you're going to work at a high level, and also how long you're simply going to be on this planet. And yet, okay, my observation of Riley, and I did cover him every day for a few years when I was a beat guy, when he was the coach, and obviously have been at pretty much all of the pressers since and everything else, is that he's mellowed a little. And I think become more sentimental over time. And we've seen that play out with with various athletes. Obviously the Dwayne thing, I think, hurt him very much personally, the way that played out, him kind of backing out of it in 2016 because he had in 2015, and sort of backfiring, and Dwayne feeling like betrayed and all that, and that relationship breaking down at that time, and other things that have happened. The Bosh thing, I think, was painful for the organization because they were trying to do the right thing. They did do the right thing. I said at the time, but Chris didn't understand it at the time. I think he does now. And then the LeBron thing, which he was just personally hurt by. And I referenced the only time I've ever gotten in his office, which was supposed to be like a 5-minute interview, and he wasn't supposed to talk about LeBron at all, and it turned into 45 minutes and was all him talking about LeBron, and just how personally hurt he was about how sort of the chain and that generational team was broken, and they were all going to go to each other's barbecues, and LeBron broke that up, and sort of his hurt about that. If LeBron was still here, I think Pat probably retires a long time ago. But it's like he's trying to win one more post LeBron. That's sort of what it feels like to me. But I have sense, again, he's become more and more sentimental over time. It comes across when he speaks publicly about some of the players, his personal reference for the guys like Haslam and others. And Pat has done many sentimental things for former players in the past. I've referenced this one too, Brian Grant. After Brian, and I wrote a long piece about this, talked to a lot of people about it. When Brian had come down with Parkinson's disease or was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he held the Shake It Till You Make It event out in Oregon. And Pat not only made this trip and gave the keynote speech, but handed him one of his forever cards. He was one of his forever men. He keeps these cards in his wallet, or he did at the time. So there's a sentimentality to him that is, I think, perceived a certain way by the fan base as softness at this point. It's the whole Pat is asleep type thing, that maybe he doesn't care as much about the winning being the last team standing as he did before, because it's more about the people that he's with and sort of the relationships that have been built. And I've said many times, and I'll go to you on this, Greg, now, is I've said many times that I think his greatest achievement for this organization, other than the structure that's been created, which has been a sustainable structure, which really only one other organization in the sport has, which is San Antonio. They are the two, to me. Obviously, San Antonio's in a down period. It's not going to last very long with Wemby. But they're the two organizations, to me, they're the class model organizations in the past quarter century. But I think that is perceived. What I wanted to say was I think his greatest achievement is look at the people he's put in place and how it will sustain after his eventual departure, where the best coach in the league came out of the video room, okay, which Pat identified him, inherited him, but identified him, helped develop him, and now has allowed him to grow in his own space and coach in a different way, completely different than Pat would have coached. And then obviously the best cap guy in the league, who's now the general manager, who was a PR intern at one point way back when, predating Pat and Andy Ellisberg. And then Adam Simon, who to me is the best college evaluator in the league right now. I think we've seen that over and over and over. And that's another guy that Pat has empowered. To me, that is becoming more of his legacy now with the organization. And I think for the fans, that's not enough, because for the fans, they want to see what I've termed as cutthroat Pat. Okay, guy doesn't, and we saw it a little in the press conference, Greg, with the availability, but then he took on Jimmy, who's kind of who is kind of the marker of the standard bearer of this era. Do you think he's gotten softer? Like, would you frame it that way?
No, I think that that's going too far, because he just sat up there. I know it's been a long off season, but he just sat up there, publicly challenged the best player on the franchise, called Tyler Hero fragile along the way. Basically everyone but Bam caught a stray to some degree, it felt like, in that moment. And I know for a fact that he doesn't always agree with what Spo does on the coaching side. He does not. And so I think that he's probably, you heard Andy at Summer League. It was a great interview on Sirius XM or somewhere like that. I heard Andy Ellisberg on, and he said Pat wanted to check everyone's trunks, all of his assistant coaches' trunks for golf clubs. And because he wanted to see like who was in it to really dig into the process and get and who wants to go on vacation. And Andy said, and I got rid of my golf clubs right after that. And so I just think that there's probably some truth to cutthroat Pat Riley. But also I think as you get older, because I've experienced this in my own damn life, and I'm obviously nowhere near as old or frankly or wise as Pat Riley is, but you start to realize that you can't live in absolutes like that, winning in misery and being so cutthroat. And it's just not a way to be. And so I think that this is, to call it soft though, I I didn't see any other general managers necessarily challenging their franchise players this offseason.
That's true. And I think sometimes people perceive it more in the transactional sense. Like, okay, they want somebody doesn't perform to a certain level or a contract, we'll get rid of it. Right. And I know there are certain players on the roster. We don't need to get over specific on it, but we know, okay, who the fans are after right now. It's mostly Tyler. And I think a lot of that is unwarranted, as I've said, but he has become sort of the lightning rod. Here it was Duncan before that, right? Like, I mean, there's always going to be a guy. It was Whiteside before that. That was warranted, by the way. But I think that when you look at, they say transactional, and they just want him to do something, and they feel like, okay, if he's not doing anything, then either he's lost his touch. And some of it is, look, the game has changed. The CBA changed on them. There is an adjustment period. Some of the things we've talked about, they couldn't really foresee, like those bonuses that they gave Tyler, etc. Other things have been out of their control. We're going to do a Joe Cronin episode eventually here. We're going to go through what Joe Cronin actually got last offseason. It's pathetic. But the Heat, I mean, whatever. If he wasn't going to deal with the Heat, he wasn't going to deal with the Heat. But I think some people do perceive it in more of a transactional way, and that he just hasn't done enough, so that he must be okay with being okay. Right. Like that's the thing, like, because you're looking at the last 2 years. I mean, they were a play-in team. Like, yes, the finals run happened. We're not going to ignore it. We enjoyed it. It was brilliant coaching, was brilliant work by Jimmy and some of the players that they had to accomplish it. But again, this has been a team that over the last 2 years has essentially had a flat net rating. Like last year, they didn't beat anybody of significance during the regular season. Like, we kept looking for a good win. And so I think that when you look at O'Reilly, who had, Magic and Jabbar and Worthy and Wilkes and I briefly Nixon, and all the rest of the players he had in LA, and then, what he put together in New York, what he put together in Miami, they're kind of like, okay, is he all right with, being sort of on the fringe of one of those teams? And I think it feels to some fans, more so I think in the social media space than in the stands, that he's softened in that way. And so I think what we want to get back to, I think what we'll get to on the other side of this break is like, what do we take out of it? Like, is it winning or misery for us as observers? And should it be for fans? Because you made the point, like they've had 2 finals runs and another conference finals. They were one shot of 3 finals in 5 years. I mean, Sacramento, missed the playoffs, 17 straight years. They had one run and they started lighting the beam. I mean, they won one playoff series that year. Did they even win a playoff? I can't even remember. But it's
you mentioned Cronin. You talk misery. There's some misery.
Exactly. And I think, even closer to home here. Now, the Panthers have sort of changed the whole dichotomy here because they've done a lot of Riley-like things and won a championship. Okay. Like Zito is the hot GM down here, rightly so, for what he's accomplished. But again, we're trying to build up hope in the Dolphins team and saying, can they finally win a fucking playoff game? And it's been since December 30th, 2000. That is misery. Okay. I covered that franchise for years. I was the number 2 columnist, the Sentinel, along with Dave Hyde in 2002 to 2010. I had to cover a lot of Dolphins. Okay. I knew none of that shit was going anywhere. Okay. I mean, 2008 was the 1 year, the Pennington Wildcat year, and they won up. I was up in the Meadowlands. They won up at, they beat Favre on that last day, and it was literally like they won the Super Bowl because they won one division title. I mean, there's only 4 damn teams in the division. It ain't that hard, okay? And yet, and then they bombed at home in the playoff game, and we're trying to build hope in them again. I mean, that is what the Dolphins have put their fans through. Okay, until this recent semi-renaissance where they still haven't won a playoff game, but at least they have an interesting coach and an exciting offense. That is misery. What the Marlins have put their fans through, such as those fans still are, that is misery. Okay, when even the Marlins fans are like, if you move the team at this point, we don't really care. What the Heat have done to their fans is not misery at all. Okay, but Pat Riley did say there's winning or misery, and I guess it does depend on whether or not winning 47 games and going out in the first round, is that considered winning? Is it the conference finals? And after the big 3, is anything good enough? Because with that, it wasn't even winning or misery. It was relief or misery. Really. That was what we were dealing with. All right. We'll talk about where we are with it. I do want to mention another great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at Prize Picks. Use the code 5, FIVE. That initial deposit, we used to tell you 1-to-1 match. It's not that anymore. It's better. You put down $5, they're handing you 50. $5, make a play, $50 into your account for you to use on other plays going forward, on other lineups. Legal again in the state of Florida. Go to prizepicks.com, use the code 5FIVE. I can tell you in Florida, the lines, well, not the lines, but the props for the season openers are already up. Tyreek Hill, I think 89.5 yards. If you want to play that one over, we'll see if he gets to that first game healthy. But go to prizepicks.com, use the code 5FIVE. So, okay, I want to go to you here in a second. I will say this, all right? To me, as a reporter, and I'm not a day-to-day reporter anymore on a lot of the home games. For me as a reporter, I just want the team to be interesting. Like, I just want the team interesting personalities. Like, I covered the 03-04 season, and that season was interesting. That season was supposed to be absolutely miserable. They started 0-7. Everybody was saying Stan was in way over his head. There was a column written that they were the worst team in NBA history after the 7th game of the season. They ended up 42-40, and not only did they beat New Orleans in the first round, but they took a very good Indiana team to 6 games, okay? That team was interesting. They didn't win a championship, as you mentioned. They were interesting. I will say that team was more interesting than the team we just covered last year.
Last year was pretty brutal. And
right.
You know, like one thing, and I don't mean to interrupt if you were going to continue to go, but
I want you to go in there because
there is one part of this, though, and I think you and I, who have well chronicled all the years of Riley in Miami, I think both of us, but correct me if you don't agree, have been a little surprised that this roster is still intact. That, like, if we just keep it to the roster building part that the fans are so, rabid about, that they want change, etc. I think if you really reflect on all the builds, it is pretty damn interesting. Like, it is a pivot from what he's done previously to hold on to this group this long. So it does beg the question if something has changed. I don't mean in a sense of him losing his touch, how you phrased it earlier. It's not really that. It's more of philosophically what's changed. Is there a different timeline in place? Is there just a broader view of everything than there was back then when it seemed to be just about winning? And they would flip, we saw such drastic change with like the PJ Brown and Jamal Mashburn for Brian Grant. And
but that took 4 years though. I mean, that took 4 years against the Knicks, 4 series going to the last game until that last one. They were all like in the front office. A lot of the same people are there. We're like, we can't do this again. But it took them 4 years. But again, it was easier to make trades then too. Like it was, because the cap was not, you weren't dealing with aprons and all these other things. And I know that where some fans are going to go with this, where like, okay, is it winning or misery for ownership? Like that's where this sometimes goes. But again, I don't blame the Heat for not going to the second apron. It is just, it's a ridiculous move to do it unless you are like guaranteeing yourself a championship. Boston, with what they have right now, okay, yes, all right, you pay it. You deal with it, okay, you're going to lose all these other vehicles, but if you're going to go all in, then you go all the way to the damn in. But where Miami is right now, I can't justify going into the second apron. I can't. And that does preclude them from doing a lot of these things. But you mentioned it is longer. But let me ask you this question. Okay, so let's go back to the bubble, right? First year of this build, okay? They drafted Tyler before Jimmy came in. Bam was already here. Those 3 and Duncan are the only 4 left, right?
Yes. I mean, UD made it all the way through and it's still around, but obviously not rostered. But yeah, that's everyone.
Well, I think that's the front office's frustration because they hear this term "run it back," and they, someone actually asked me in the front office, "What does running it back mean?" Because we talk about it all the time, and I said, I think to the fans it means Tyler's still on the roster.
Now it does.
And the person laughed. Yeah. And the person laughed, but I think that's because, and I think the reason for that, I don't think it's Tyler specific. I think it is because of the fact that Pat in the past has always traded the third guy. And this time he hasn't to this point. It's always been the third guy. It's like at a certain point, it's like, okay, we have this 2-person core, and I mean Timmy and Zoe, right? Okay, we're gonna flip. Mash was the third guy. PJ was the stable guy, but Mash was the third guy
for sure.
Okay, and then it was Shaq and Dwayne and Eddie, right? And then at a certain point, but what's interesting because Mash was basically flipped for Eddie, but then it essentially, I mean, multiplayer trade, but then you end up trading Eddie. And you got other pieces where it wasn't, we've talked about that trade a lot, but the trade I didn't like that blew up in my face, but like Antoine Walker and all the other, and Posey, etc.
Antoine was paid on that extent when he got the contract that sent him to Miami. He was paid to kind of be a third guy, and then got flipped for Ricky Davis when they tried to like figure out another solution there. So
that backfired, right? And that backfired. And Antoine was never going to be a long-term option for them, I don't think. But it was like, okay, what can we squeeze out of him? And then, Antoine famously told us in the locker room in Dallas in 2006 that he was going to keep drinking through the entire offseason. He was a man of his word because he came back to camp, and he and Posey were both suspended for being out of shape. So, I mean, they knew that was a team that could detonate like at any time. It's just that, and I thought it would detonate, and I ended up being wrong basically because Dwayne went nuclear, which again, I'll own up to it. But I guess the point is, like, if you look at previous teams, okay, in the big three, it was winning or misery. Like there was no other option. Like it was misery, even though they got to the finals in 2011. It was just that it was easy to scapegoat LeBron on that because he deserved to be the scapegoat of that. 2014, we kind of saw the run was kind of coming into an end, and so I don't know that we necessarily expected them. I didn't even think they'd get back to the finals that year the way that they were playing. So the fact that they lost wasn't that big a deal. I think since then we have recategorized it a little bit because I never thought, and I'll go to you here to close. After covering the big three, okay, which I covered home and road, and I mentioned the Dolphins. I was stuck covering a lot of Dolphins, and I remember being at the ceremony in 2010, the not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4 thing, and I was standing there with Sedano, and we're standing there together, and he looks at me, he goes, "You're going to keep covering the Dolphins?" And I just looked at it, I said, "Nah, I need to be covering this every day." And that's when I was fortunate because the Palm Beach Post decided to bring back their Heat coverage. And since I had done it before, I was like, yes, I'll take it. Okay, I'll be the columnist. I'll leave the Sentinel, I'll go to the Palm Beach Post. Like, to me, that was the master's degree of like sports journalism. Like I had a master's for that, but not a real one because you have to actually do it. And like to cover that team on a day-to-day basis, there's nothing that will ever match that professionally for me. Nothing. Like they were the first Twitter team. They had the most interesting personalities. They had Bron. We had the crowds on the road. I mean, they hated him in Portland. He was never going to Portland. Okay. Like it was just everything. And you had the most reporters and you were competing on a daily basis as a journalist. Okay. And I said, after that was over, I will never cover anything like that again. Okay, like that was it. Like I will never have anything quite that good, that exciting. I can remember everything from those games, the Millsap threes, everything. Wayne Ellington going off on them in Memphis, all these circumstances. And I'll say this, and this is what I'll say about the Jimmy era. The Jimmy era has come close. Like as boring as last regular season was, in terms of like some of the moments, the excitement, the game against Milwaukee that he had, the whole bubble run, the way Dragic played, all of this stuff, like, and that to me, as I look at it as an observer, like nothing was going to match the big three era, but to me, they've kind of won in this era, even though they haven't won. Okay. Like that's how I view it. But I understand the fan because I never thought anything would get close and it has, and I give them credit for putting something else together. But I do understand the fans, Greg, who say, and you've said this too, if you were that close, okay, and it is winning or misery, then where has the final push been? And why does it feel now like we're actually saying it's okay to take a step back? That, okay, we push this as far as we can, and now maybe there's no Jimmy extension, and now maybe we're rebuilding around Bam and some of the young players, and there is a sensible reason to do that, okay? And 20 games into the season, I might be in support of that. But it doesn't feel, like you said, like the Heat to, like, say, all right, we pushed this as far as we could, but we didn't get over the finish line, reset. Not rebuild, reset, reframe, reload, however you want to call it, it does feel different. I will say that.
I can't believe a retool hasn't happened. I really can't. Like I thought for sure in one of the two last off seasons that it would happen. I think the Dame, and I hate that I have to bring this up on this episode, but I really think that the Dame trade was a curveball that it was a layup. And I think a lot of people expected it to be a layup, and it didn't happen. And that was the move. And it just was. And it felt a little bit like they've been reeling to figure out what's next. I mean, I think we know Bam is next and stuff like that. And the young players, we've chronicled all that. I don't know why I'm using that word a lot today. But it is a little, I mean, I understand where fans come from, where they start to think about Jimmy's timeline, Pat's timeline, Spoelstra being the people are calling him the best head coach on planet Earth right now. And it's like, why are you not going all in with that guy? Eventually Bam's going to turn 30, not now, but eventually. And so you just start to ask the questions of when are you going to go all in? And I think just Heat fans are so used to that. I wouldn't say that this era, and I'm surprised you said what you did, it has came close to what the big three has been, because the rock star mentality of that era, I don't think has been there, but some of the moments, you're right, it has been, because they've been so unexpected. It's like a pure joy that you kind of get to witness it, because you didn't have the expectations. The one thing about when LeBron left, and I'm veering off just for a moment, that there was a little bit of maybe it was just me, but every game felt like it was so pressurized, and you had to win every game, and you got laughed at if you didn't. It was exhausting. And I did feel like some of the teams with Jimmy on them, because you didn't have those expectations, it was sweeter to get there in certain ways because you didn't feel the pressure that you had to do it. And so that's why it's kind of changed my philosophy on some of this winning or misery stuff. And I understand why fans would be frustrated. And I do think that it is a weird moment where the franchise is kind of at a crossroads. And so it's going to make this season interesting in one way or the other, from the perspective of learning what direction they're going to go, how this Jimmy Butler situation is going to be handled. But it does seem a little bit like the all-out winning mentality. There's at least some they're measuring things now in a different way. I don't know how else to quantify it other than to say that they're definitely, the temperature check is just different these days.
Well, I think you're right, and I think you are right about why I view this as close to the big three, because this organization, I think, operates better chasing than being chased. But it's a funny dichotomy. And so those moments were sweeter to have Jimmy doing these things that you're like, wait a second, Giannis is supposed to be better than him. Why is he outplaying Giannis? Why is he outplaying this guy? Why is this team in the bubble coming together the way it's come together, and then forward? But I think it's kind of a two-pronged thing here, and they seem like they're at odds with each other. This organization, I think, operates best chasing, but yet the fans want them to have enough pieces, okay? Even if the rest of the country and the media doesn't see it, they want them to have enough pieces to actually catch what they're going for. And I think that's the thing. It's like, okay, we're chasing, we're underdogs. Nobody believes in us. ESPN will talk about Golden State and the Lakers and all these other things. So, yeah, we're going to sneak up on all your asses. But we have enough, okay, in a real way, not in a Spoelstra saying it because he's trying to empower his players and all the rest of this, but in a real way, we have enough to get over the finish line. And the reality is they haven't, okay? They haven't. Against Denver, you could play that series with Hero, without Hero. You can play that series a million times. They're losing that series. They're just losing that series.
Agreed.
They were not as good as that team. Denver has lost some pieces since, but they were not as good as that team. The Laker series, there was the pre-COVID Heat. There was the post-COVID Heat. They were kind of falling apart pre-COVID. Then they kind of got it together. They found a play style. Dragic was playing probably the best basketball of his Heat career at that point. And again, if Goran doesn't get hurt, if Bam doesn't get hurt, you never know, because I don't think that was a great Laker team. I really don't. And I think they could have won it, particularly in those circumstances, because they were the best coach, the best condition, the best, all of that stuff. And they deserved credit for that instead of being slandered for it. The reality is the reason they succeeded in the bubble was because they're so well run. That's why. Like, you don't count that against a team. That's part of what makes a team and an organization great. They deserved a shot at the championship. But last year they didn't have enough. This year, again, they don't have enough. They have enough to transition to something else. And they have more pieces to work with going forward, and they have some interesting stories that I think more interesting stories than they had last year. But they don't necessarily have enough, and I think that is, again, that's where Heat fans, they want to chase. They're fine with the chasing. Okay, the Big Three era I think was uncomfortable for Heat fans, but they were kind of chasing in the Timmy Zoe years too. They were chasing Jordan, they were chasing that. It's just that they got tripped up by the Knicks, 3 times before they really had a shot. I think we're going to find out a lot in the first, and we'll close here, a lot in the first 20 to 30 games this year about what direction they really want to go. And if they get off to kind of a 14-14 start, they're kind of middling, again, net rate, not beating anybody good, net rating about flat, then I think we're going to have those conversations about, okay, you know what? We take the era for what it was, and now it's time to pivot and start kind of a new build. And I think that's when we start to have the conversations of, in February or late January, what can you get for your franchise player? That's going to be, to me, that's kind of where this is headed. If they get off to a good start, they will sell themselves on having a chance to be contenders. They
Agree.
will. They always do. Okay. But if they don't, we're going to look a little different. Anyway, all over the place on this, but wanted to give you our thoughts on it because it has come up a lot. And there's an interesting discussion on or off the floor about this. Everybody wants championships. I want an interesting team to follow, cover, and a team that has a chance to surprise at times, win big if things break right. They've basically provided that over the past, Pat's provided that over the past 30 years, but I don't think he's planning on working until 85 or 90 and not winning another one. So we'll see what happens with that. All right. Thanks to Greg. Thanks to our sponsor, c-armandstaffing.com. We said we go 15 minutes. Greg and I get on these narrative topics. These could be like 4 hours.
Yeah.
Also thanks to our sponsor, Prize Picks. Use the code 5, FIVE.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.